We need at our table of awareness the logician, but equally we need the intuitive, we need the mystic.
I almost died. I was allowed to go to the very precipice of death, of life and death, and look over the edge. And I was allowed to behold what was there and allowed to come back. Most people aren't.
When we talk about being aligned with ourself or being aligned with our soul or hearing our higher self, that's really what we're talking about, is being connected to that divine part of ourself, that light-filled part of us that is connected to God energy, that is connected to everybody here and every experience we've ever had.
If more doctors, more professionals can open up to use intuitive gifts in their work, that's really important.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, mediumship, near-death experiences, consciousness, and what it all means. Meghan Riordan Jarvis is a guest that I've been wanting to have on the show for quite some time. I've been following her in the grief space and am completely moved by her story. So Meghan is a therapist. She's also an author, a podcast host, a 2-time TEDx speaker, and a consultant. But what is so incredible about her story is that after suffering through two significant losses for herself, she ended up in an inpatient hospitalization program dealing with her grief, completely overcome by it. And her story is so fascinating because she's able to talk about what it's like having been a therapist for so many years, a grief therapist, and then experiencing the grief herself and how she reconciled her own struggles with having known and had all the information for all that time. And I think this is so important because just because you have information, just because you know the process one goes through when they experience X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean when it happens to you yourself, you don't also struggle with it. It is not a failure of you as a human. It is part of you being a human. And that is what I love about Meghan's story, is it's so genuine, it's so heartfelt, and it's so authentic, just like she is. I know you will love today's episode with Meghan Riordan Jarvis. Welcome, Meghan, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Amy, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this since we scheduled.
I mean, we've already had like a 25-minute conversation, so which is catching up on we're very fast and old friends here. But I wanted to hear a bit about your story because what I think struck me and what was so powerful was that you started as a grief therapist and you were a grief therapist for 20 years. Yeah. And then you experienced your own grief that totally shifted your perspective. So, and shifted your life, frankly. I mean, it really took you out at the knees.
Yeah.
So tell us what happened and then I'll dig in further about, therapists and what it's like to be in it and all of that.
So what I often say is that I'm a trauma therapist who specializes in grief and loss, meaning I'm trained in a lot of the, treatment modalities. So you know this, but not the come in and tell me how you are and we're just going to talk about how you are, but actual things where it's oh, okay, you haven't slept in 6 days. We're going to use these interventions. I'm going to teach them to you. You're going to go and take those tools. And hopefully we're going to improve sort of your central nervous system dysregulation, which is really maybe how I define trauma as a bad thing that happened. My clients were often traumatized, which means that bad thing had created, real meaning in their life, and they were living with symptoms and ideas and limitations that hadn't been there before.
And that's such an important distinction to make, especially now, because I feel like we throw this word trauma around trauma this, trauma that. There's a difference between trauma and traumatized.
Absolutely. So I say that a lot. And then what I have sort of come to understand is that the central nervous system dysregulation that I learned about in trauma, which is look, what's going on with your person and their system? Are they having an identity crisis? Are they not able to eat? Are they, feeling threatened suddenly by their attachments? What is it that is destabilized what I really came to understand is like all of that is also true when we're grieving. And so when I say I specialize in grief and loss, it's almost like the lens at which I look at trauma is what is lost. And then my belief is that because there's a loss in every change, in every event, particularly events that you don't choose, but also events that you choose, right? I'm going away to college, but there's still a tremendous amount of loss associated with that sort of a shift. So the grief component for me is grief is the energy that's created inside the body on account of loss. And so we focus a lot in loss as like, what was lost? I lost my mother, but like, yeah. And what added to my system is all this energy on account of that loss. And so that energy might look like anxiety. That energy might look like, a sense of disconnect to spirituality, or that energy might look like depression, or that energy might look like confusion or anger. So a lot of what I've been doing for the past 22 years is sort of like getting a quick picture of what is the energy, and then using all the tools and techniques that I know about central nervous system regulation, meaning how do I bring my sort of energetic center back to a 5 if 10 is a panic attack and 0 is I'm asleep. How do I get back to a place where I can really function? So that, I was a trauma therapist. I got a lot of really good training early. I specialized in grief and loss. So talking to people just with the lens of grief and loss. I worked, over the 22 years that I've been in private practice, I have worked in seasons. So I had seasons where I was working with moms, of young children. I had seasons where I was working with a lot of people who were going through divorces. Maybe I had a season, I don't know how this happened, where I was working with a lot of people whose addiction was specifically in like the sexual realm. So I really loved all the learning process. And what I kind of thought was like, well, I'm really well educated, really well trained. I have had the passive instruction of supporting people for a really long time. I think I thought like, well, I'm pretty inoculated from anything, destroying me. And my dad in 2016 was diagnosed with small cell cancer, which is a death sentence. And my experience with his cancer was that I sort of got to participate in his death. He knew he was dying. I knew he was dying. We spent a lot of time together with intention, knowing that, the clock was running out. And while it was really sad and pretty disruptive to my life, because I traveled back and forth to Cape Cod where he was, it didn't knock me off my horse, is how I often describe it. Like I was still walking the same path. I just wasn't walking it at the same speed with the same energy.
And I love your use of energy in all of this. I just want to point that out for my listeners, because I talk a lot about energy, but you're talking about it in such grounded psychological terms. Like it's not this thing that just happens to you. It's what's created within you that we don't pay attention to. And I don't think we talk about it in that way.
I agree. Like when I'm educating people, that's really the root of where the education comes from. One, I start with like, hey, are you aware of your energy? So I work with a lot of CEOs and people in corporate environments. And when people have gotten to the point where they're like in charge of 44,000 employees, often they're totally disconnected from things like their hunger cues or whether or not they have to go to the bathroom. So in order to work with folks who are struggling, you have to make sure that like, is the plug plugged into the socket? Are you even aware of what the energy feels like inside your body? And so the early components of the work that I do often looks a little bit like mindfulness so that we can get connected. But then there's this core grief education, which is like, look, our brain has two competing functions. One is the sympathetic nervous system, which is really meant to like invigorate us and activate us. Fight and flight are part of that system. If we need to run away or if we need to fight a bear, that's the part of us that gets activated when it's overactive. When it's been conditioned to be overactive, then it's this, anxious system that we have a hard time turning off. And then the sympathetic nervous system, which is the cooling system, which is the one that sort of takes us, which is why like anxiety and depression can sometimes be a circle. I get too anxious, it kicks on that parasympathetic nervous system. But it's really important for people to know, do I run more anxious or do I run more depressed? Because when you're looking at some of the material out there, and again, remember, we don't have core grief education. Like the Surgeon General hasn't given us 12 steps to mindfully, attending to our grief. But what we get are sort of like, a one pager in a magazine or the folks on Instagram who are doing the best they can with their own personal experience. And they're saying things like hot yoga really helped me, or, a lavender bath really helped me. But you really want people to be better educated about that. Like if you haven't gotten out of bed for 10 days, a hot lavender bath it's contraindicated, as we say.
Right. You want to understand how your system is regulated. You don't turn up the heat in a house that's already at 90 degrees.
Yes.
Or if
and that's exactly it. And I think of grief work, there's this terrible event that happened. So when my mom died, it was an absolute traumatic event. She died. I immediately internalized this thought that I had, which was like, it is your fault that she died. I know enough about ruminations and about those kinds of externalized thoughts. I know what they are, which is sometimes a distraction because it's very hard to know how in the world am I going to live without this person that I've been attached to my whole life. But I knew the relentless way in which it showed up. It showed up as a sentence that was sort of ticking in my mind. And then it showed up as sort of like my full mind only thought that sentence. It was so dysregulating to my body that I knew I was going to need all the treatments that I also provide to people. And I know, we have a phrase in the therapy world, which is next level of care, which basically means you're not getting what you need in an office. You need more than that.
Right.
And so for me, my symptoms were so bad, so fast that within, 3 months of my mom's death, I had checked myself into the same inpatient facility that I send all my clients. And the fascinating thing is like, I can train those people. Like I know everything that they know, but you need to be able to sort of focus into your five senses experience and have somebody help you interrupt some of those energetic flows and get them righted so that they're going where they need to go at the speed that they need to go and not sending messages like there's a bear here to attack you when there is no bear here to attack you. And it's very difficult to do those things on their own. I mean, from a trauma therapy perspective, what we say is the bad thing happens if we can get the right interventions there, attuned and titrated in the right capacity, we may be able to keep people from then becoming traumatized. That's the real effort, I think, of education. And I was just out in LA supporting victims of the fire. And I can tell you, like, some of those faces were the most traumatized looks I have seen in a long time. And it was like trying to wash a kitten or something. Like I was trying to wrangle them back into their energy back into their bodies and get them and like use this tool, use these 3 tools, call these resources in the hopes that they won't be, not able to sleep 5 months from now.
Right. Because then there's more symptoms that then arise from that.
Yeah. What I always say is like, the way that your brain works is the amygdala are these, tiny little things that enlarge in the back of our brain. And the way that the side effect of them enlarging in order to tell us to fight or flee or ultimately, to sort of freeze or collapse, the side effect is the regular mail doesn't get delivered because it can't make it to the regular mailboxes. And then when that mail doesn't go to the brain in the right mailboxes, the messages that come from those mailboxes back into the body are also not the right messages. And so very quickly we get dysregulated.
Right.
And
you're
that
like short-circuiting the whole system.
Yeah. And so we really want to interrupt that dysregulation and try to come back into a state of neutral as fast as possible, which is not the same as saying we want to take away your grief. Grief is a totally appropriate response that is a constellation of emotions that happen because we have lost something untenable that we don't, know how to live without. You can grieve a football game also, but for our purposes, we're talking about really significant loss. And primarily in the early days, the way that we experience that loss is through our body. And so if we focus on the body early and sort of try to say, how can we get you back to neutral? Not, you shouldn't be feeling this way.
So what do you think is the difference? I mean, I know that you were able to walk your dad through his death, so that helped. And then there was a sudden loss of your mom.
Yes.
Which is, one differentiator. But what do you think differentiates someone like in the LA fires? One person from experiencing like having that look of like sheer, I don't even know how to put one foot in front of the other next,
Yeah.
versus someone else who's like, we're gonna rebuild.
Yeah.
And this is how we're going to look at this. And here's what we're going to do. But they're also feeling everything. They're just not moving in the direction of potentially traumatized by it. And I think this is about 9/11, right? Like everybody who has these different reactions to the same event, and you being someone who you would think, oh, she's got all the resources and all the tools available, and here she is.
Right.
What does that say about me, the person who's like just trying to get through the day, if this happened to me?
Yeah. So, I wrote a memoir about my experience because it developed into PTSD. And it's like not every day that your trauma therapist also checks into the same inpatient facility that she sends other people to. And I wrote it exactly for the purpose that you're describing, which is essentially to say grief is not an intellectual problem. That if it was about knowing the things, like intellectually understanding them, I would have circumnavigated it without any, experience. I do think you're right. I do think that sudden loss hits the system the way like in those old Wile E. Coyote, where they one hits the other with a frying pan. There's some neuroscience out there that said it's the equivalent of having a concussion, like a profound concussion.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
The way that I often think about it is like, it's like a drain where too much liquid is trying to go down. And, it's too much information that you weren't expecting, and your brain is really kind of short circuiting. And then again, the short circuiting sends the wrong messages down the vagus nerve into the body, and then the body short circuits. So I think part of it is about sudden loss. I think part of it is, who did you lose? Who were they to you in your life? I mean, I often describe my mom as the center tent pole to the circus, which is not to say that she was the person. I do not want people to get the impression that my mother was a saint and we had the most amazing relationship, mother-daughter relationship, and I told her everything. She was a pinnacle force in my life. And when I say she was the center tent pole, I think I had a kind of codependent, like always looking to her. And a lot of that stuff came from trauma in my childhood. So and I write this, in my clinical book, Can Anyone Tell Me? I write about, one of the chapters is called, Can Anyone Tell Me Why My Childhood Matters in My Grief?
Which I thought was so important, because I think that there's probably a tendency to not address childhood when grief hits, because it feels like, oh, this is just something that happened now.
Yeah, but your question is the best question there is, which is like, why is this so hard for some people and not so hard for others? So, when we're looking at someone and we're doing like a 5-axial diagnosis as a clinician, basically what that means is you're looking across their whole life to see how they might be vulnerable. And one of those lines is about their social connections. Like, how well are they established in the community? Who are they connected to? Our Vivek Murthy, our surgeon general.
I was just going to say, this is why connection is so critical.
Right. And I have a curriculum called the Grief Mentor Method, where we teach about connection. We teach about the neuroscience of connection. We teach about how it can inoculate you from certain things. But even connection gets really screwed up in grief, right? So there's even the things that we can say, oh, I have this is solid in my life. My relationship with my husband and I there's not a lot of daylight between us, but in End of the Hour, I write about how suddenly he became part of this threat of the system rather than something that felt like a resource. And that was the first time I had ever felt that way about him. So I think our childhood, I think the way in which we are conditioned, to respond, whether we get really anxious. If you're a child, let's say, of an alcoholic, this is not true in every case, but it's true in lots of cases, that you have almost like overdeveloped antenna because you are paying attention to details that most kids would not have to pay attention to, because
you need to keep yourself safe.
Keep yourself safe, or maybe your person isn't a violent drunk. Maybe they just also forget to like make your lunch the next morning. Or so I don't mean safety like you're in danger, but more just sort of like you are attending to things in this parentified way that for your sake or the sake of your siblings that like other kids wouldn't necessarily do. And so what that means is when something really terrible happens, like a loss, You may also, in that sense of threat, that renaissance of feeling unstable and vulnerable, suddenly start attending to details in the way that you did as a kid, where you're suddenly like, well, that person over there is raising their hand because they want the waiter to come over. And your family's like, who cares?
Right.
Go get the waiter. Why are you paying attention? And then that makes what you have to do harder because your energy is being expended in places that it wouldn't necessarily find any resolution in.
Because you're going back to that sort of familiarity of childhood that you knew how to manage these emotions.
Yes. And the way that the brain experiences the world is it codes information almost like color codes. Like it puts like a Post-it notes tab. So if your dog died and then your grandfather died and then a friend in college died and then your spouse died and now your dad died, kind of all of those experiences go in the same yellow folder of your brain. And so for some people, they have so much compound loss that has never been addressed that by the time we get to the dad dying, we pull on the tab and it's like everything comes out. And so I do think there was some of all of that for me. There were splinters left over from unresolved behaviors and trauma in childhood. I think my dad had just died. My mom dying.
That wound was still open.
Yeah, I do. I can't say exactly why it was so much harder, but I feel like if we sat down to do therapy and really dig into it, it would be like, well, that makes sense that was so hard for you. What's interesting is that in my memoir, you're not supposed to read the reviews of your books, but I do. I read them. And there are a number of people that are like, this book doesn't make any sense to me. What the hell happened to this woman? Why was this so hard for her? And they're kind of mad. Like, this was not a good book. And I'm like, yeah, I don't make any sense to you because your life is not like mine. Like, I did the best I could with the words because there are other ones that are like, this book meant so much to me.
Right.
Like, I understand this so inherently. So I think it's hard to tease out like, why did this destroy you, Meghan? But like, you have 5 brothers and sisters and nobody else had to check themselves into an inpatient facility.
But I think I think what's for me is so powerful. And I say this all the time because when people ask me about my belief system and do I believe, that when we die, our spirit still lives on, and yes, and yes. And I fully recognize, and I always use my kids as God forbid, knocking on wood, something happened to my kids. Yeah. I'm not sure how protective that would be. I don't know that I would not be completely brought to my knees, with you in the inpatient.
Right.
It's been a while since I've talked to you about what I'm up to. I want to first start by thanking so many of my supporters who have supported me on Patreon and in my Circle community. What's so exciting now is we have my new Circle community up and running, where if you want to contribute to supporting the podcast, you can do so at different levels for different values. So head on over to my Circle group. You can actually find the link in the show notes below. And there's opportunities to continue to support the podcast. And I have to say, your support of the podcast is frankly what has kept this podcast going over time. I have been funding the podcast solely by myself. I get a little bit of money in advertising dollars, but not a lot. So anything that you can give, if you have found value in this podcast, and it's not just giving without anything back, I will give back to you. You will be a part of this community with opportunities for discounts and conversations and ask Amy anythings. But it's a great opportunity for you to support what hopefully has helped you over the many, many years. Also, there's so many other ways now that you can work with me. I am offering a group course called Live Your Life Backwards, which is finishing its first cohort this winter and has been absolutely incredible. There's retreats coming up. There's workshops. There's one-on-one sessions with me. So many options that we can work together. So make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to my podcast, and make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter, where you will get a free soul wisdom workbook to help you dig deeper into the virtues that you want to be living in this lifetime. We all need so much more spirituality now. We are in a spiritual crisis, and I'm giving you so many tools to tap into your own spirituality. So check out and don't forget to subscribe to Life, Death, and the Space Between so you never miss an episode.
Well, and it's so interesting. Part of the reason I was so excited to talk to you is that I think the concept of really thinking about spirituality and energetic connection to the spirit component of our lives is something that we tiptoe around in therapy instead of like we call it out. It's almost like the Pledge of Allegiance and then like saying, you know, a prayer in school. Like everybody does it, but we're not supposed to say that we're doing it. Mm-hmm. The reality is there are some treatment modalities like IFS, which it's almost a little bit like if you go into a sober room and you're working a program, they're kind of like, well, I mean, we mean it's God, but you call it whatever you want.
Right.
You know, IFS really talks about internal family systems, which is a tool that I think is just like mind-blowingly amazing. It really talks about the self, and what it means is the soul. Mm-hmm. That's really what it means. Like Dick Schwartz will probably hit me when I see him this summer, but like that's what it means. And I had a deeply spiritual life as a child. I was raised in a Catholic church outside of Boston, just outside of Boston. I loved church. I loved the music. I loved the red carpet. I loved the Christmas season. I loved the Old Testament and how terrifying it was, and the New Testament and how I didn't really believe the New Testament at all. Just seemed like a really fantastical story that people with discerning minds shouldn't believe. But the Old Testament somehow seemed more like Greek mythology. Everything about church I thought was incredible. And my mom was really deeply religious. Catholicism, you know, we were like the triple thread of Irish Catholics in Boston. You know, it was like big family, 6 kids. And that changed. We got a new priest and I hated him. I used to make fun of his voice. I didn't want to go to CCD classes, Catholic catechism classes. My mom and I fought a bunch, particularly when I was in like middle school. And ultimately I went abroad. I lived abroad when I was in college, and I was going to Catholic services, which were not easy to find. And then I was going to Church of England services. And I was really energetically like available to beauty and awe and poetry and music and just really deeply spiritually connected. And then I don't even know when did the movie Spotlight come out? I discovered through that our priest was one of the primary pedophiles.
The one you did not like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had already left the Catholic Church. I was living in DC, so it wasn't like exploding through the newspapers the way it had in Boston. And my mom never mentioned it. And so, I mean, my sister and I talked about it because she just went and saw the movie because Mark Ruffalo was in it. And she was like, holy shit, Megan. Like Father Paquin is in this movie. And then I went down a total rabbit hole. And I was like, oh my God, I could feel this. I could feel this.
Right.
I didn't know what it was.
Right. And I always say that when we teach, like part of the reason we don't trust our intuition, it doesn't sound like this happened to you, but I don't know, maybe it did, is that we go when we're young, we go to adults and we say like, are you mad at me? Or I have a bad feeling.
And they say no.
And they say, I don't know what you're talking about. And like in that moment, you just turned off your kid's intuitive abilities.
Yeah,
like,
no. So that is what happened. I mean, my mom and I fought. She was like, you're being disrespectful. You're not, you know, and I was like, okay, well then fine. I just won't be Catholic. Like, and also I didn't, you know, there were elements of the Catholic Church. I was like, come on, no women on the altar. And like, why do you care who loves who? So there were real core elements that also didn't match for me. But I could feel it. And so then I went down a really dark road of like learning every single detail about what had unwound. But by this time, the religious trauma, right? So we're not really talking about spirituality. We're talking about like the religion on top of the spirituality. I had looped them together. And so my spiritual light had like sort of been crushed. Like I could feel it in music. Like I could feel the like And I could feel it in therapy. I use the energy in my body to know when someone is in need of a shift, an energetic shift. I know when people are telling me the truth because I get like a cold energy inside my body. I know when I'm headed in the right direction because I feel spacey and I know what it is. I could feel it in therapy. And so it was like that love that I had, or that aliveness that I had in church that went dim, like started up again when I was in therapy. And I would be really available when I would be reading books about therapy or doing therapy work for all the beauty and the awe and the sense of like, oh my God, of the world.
Expandedness, it sounds like this just
Yes.
like expanded connection.
So I spent a long time with my mom, not talking about what I felt was a profound betrayal. She remained Catholic, was, deeply religious her whole life, kind of like daily mass. And when I got into trouble, meaning like my kids were sick, or I was worried that someone was going to die, or I was worried about somebody's marriage, or I was worried about my health, I would call my mom and be like, hey, could you just like get your little old lady prayer chain on the phone? It was like yelling at the sky, I don't believe in you, God, right? Like that, it doesn't work. You wouldn't yell at the sky and say, I don't believe in you if you didn't believe in you. But I couldn't have a straight conversation myself because of all the just
mistrust,
damage.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to get right with it. And then my mom died and she was my phone call to God. Right. She was my phone and the person I could be like, Mom, there was this butterfly or these roses or this whatever, or you won't believe what happened. And I would share books with her, or things that I was involved in that had this like deeply spiritual. And by spiritual, what I mean is the sense that we are all interconnected by the energy of, something bigger than ourselves. And what I often say to people is my favorite spiritual documentary, which maybe you've seen, is called Fantastic Fungi.
Yes.
It's right.
I had him on the show, Louis Schwartzman.
No.
Who was the producer of it.
So
he wrote another, he produced another beautiful.
What is it?
It's
watch it right now.
Gratitude. It's about gratitude. I can't remember the specific name. I can text you, but also a beautiful documentary, like just
so what I say to people is like, I don't know, but that's not nothing is what I say a lot. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, is there a heaven? I don't know. My husband said this thing to me after my mom died, which always chokes me up, which is like, because I was like, oh my God, did she go to heaven? Like she wanted that and she believed in that. And he said, I sort of believe that everybody gets what they believe in. Sort of the same way that like we're all kind of maybe saying the same thing, but you're saying it from a Hindu perspective and I'm saying it from like an Old Testament perspective. And I loved that idea. And Fantastic Fungi basically is like, look, mycelium, it recycles all the organic material on the planet. It recycles it back so that we can use it again. And the quantum physics of it is the energy stays. So like my mom's body isn't here, but her energy is here. And what I write about in End of the Hour, when after my mom dies, I am not joking. If it was a movie, people would be like, cut these scenes. They're a little heavy-handed. Like there was like a butterfly on the lawn that like a kind of butterfly that like isn't really normally there. It's the Christian symbol of resurrection.
Yeah, you write about this and can anyone tell me too?
I do. I write about, and like I am like, whatever, look, there's a butterfly. And there's another part of me is like, Meghan, that's not just a butterfly.
Yeah. I mean,
there were so many symbols. There were so many things that at the time I was like, fuck off. That's not what that is.
Well, and those moments too, it's like, those are the moments that I feel like I want to bottle up because those are the moments where I think this is what you're speaking to. You feel so deeply rooted and connected to all that is. It's like impossible not to. And yet they feel so fleeting. And the minute your like brain comes back on, you start questioning it all and you stop believing in the magic and the awe and the wonder that at that one moment, I mean, I've had so many of these moments where I'm like, this can't be. Like, I have to be making this up.
Right.
It cannot be possible.
Right. And so again, like, I don't know what that is, but it's not nothing. I don't. And so in the early days when my PTSD really, it held me accountable for my mom's death. And even though I knew I was not, even still, sometimes I think I was. Like, the brain is a really complex way, like matter. And it told me I was at fault. It's your fault that she died. And so in the early days, I wanted her to not be anywhere near me because I thought she would be mad at me. I mean, we were a little mad at each other when she died because she wasn't well. And we had a fight, and I was like, you should let me take you to the doctor. And she was pissed at me. What was available, and I probably could have felt, I also did not want. And I think my central nervous system was so dysregulated that if I added like also spirituality or God or something more into it, even if it was meant to be healing, I'm not sure I would have been able to handle it. Mm-hmm. But pretty quickly, I mean, it was interesting because I started my podcast, and because this happens to you, like you start a podcast and almost immediately PR people are like, we would like to recommend this person for your podcast.
Yeah. I'm like, did you read about my podcast?
Yeah. Really?
Because I'm not sure that they fit the bill.
I'm not sure.
Right.
I just selected all the people who wanted to talk about spirituality. And I would be like, hey, so tell me about the book that you wrote. And also, can you tell me whether you think my mom is still on, the plane? Like, how do you see things? Mm-hmm. So I started that conversation really like tentatively, maybe with the grief theory of continuing bonds in my mind, this idea that like, we don't just disconnect from people. We stay connected, and then we try to figure out a way to sort of think about them in the present moment, even though they're not physically here. So I was like, okay, that's what people do when they say like, oh, they saw a cardinal and that was their mom, or they picked up a dime and they knew that it was from their mom, So I had a couple of experiences where like my whole body rang like a bell, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but it's not nothing. But what really other than talking to the medium Bill Phillips, who I have coming up on my podcast.
I love Bill.
Yeah. So Bill, I was terrified. I got on his wait list. His wait list is like a year long. So when I did talk to him, I mean, there's just no way my mother wasn't with him. Mm-hmm. Like I had written.
You mean with you?
With me. Yeah. With me.
Right.
There's no way my mother was not speaking to him and he wasn't translating her. Right. The things that he was saying, I was like she was making jokes and like very specific jokes. There was a whole bunch of stuff where I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who that person is. But she was there and she was saying some things. So was my dad. And I that felt safe to me. But for a long time, when people were like, oh, you could see a medium, I was like, that scares the crap out of me. I'm not ready for that. But what did happen was I the day that End of the Hour, my memoir published, many people were like, oh, your mother would be so proud. And I'm like, you did not know my mother. She would not have spoken to me for writing this book about her and my dad. Absolutely not. And so that's actually one of the things that Bill Phillips said is like, I didn't dedicate the book to my mom. I dedicated it to my sisters. And Bill was like, so this woman, I think it's your mom. She wants you to know she knows about the page in the book. And she thinks that's funny.
No
and I was
way.
Like, and he had no way of knowing I'd written a book.
I mean, that's so.
It was magic.
Obscure.
So on the day that I was going up, my book had just published, I think that day. And I was going up to New York to a party at my publisher's. I saw the numbers 1111 on the phone, and you and I have a friend in common, Barry Liner Grant, and Barry is really the number 444 means something to her.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. Huge. Like,
and I had
mind blowing.
She and I had so many conversations about angel numbers. She really was my educator about those. And I was like, look at that, 1111, how funny, that's an angel number. And then later in the day, I saw 333, and I was like, that's so weird. I never see these. And that was almost 2 years ago. And a year ago. My book is a year old. I have never not seen those numbers. I have thousands, well, whatever the math is. I have hundreds of pictures of angel numbers on my phone. I never go a day without seeing either 1111 or 333.
How important?
And that's not nothing.
No. And I mean, you're speaking my language here, but how important do you feel like that is in the grief process for people?
Yeah. So, here's the thing. I don't know in the grief mentor method, which is what we created, it's 6 core components to creating a personalized grief practice. Each one of the components, I think, is a place that people struggle. So like one of the the mentor stands for M, the mindfulness, so that you can sort of connect to your energy. E is about energy, like we talked about. N is about nourishment, knowing what nourishes you and who nourishes you, and also eating macronutrients so that your body can do what it needs to do. T is translation, like how do you tell the story of what happened to you to yourself and also to others? Does it dysregulate you? Is it okay? O is outside, which is like you're going to have to go outside into the world for the awe and the connection to the larger and the greater, but also you're going to have to go outside your network of people. And R is about ritual and rest. And each one of those components has these they're there because people struggle with them. They really deeply struggle. And what I would say
they
is
struggle with them, not just in grief.
Correct. This is a good life model. Yes, right. Correct. We struggle, like grief is so isolating, right? We feel so separate from the world because the world seems to be functioning and we are not, because we are going through this devastating loss.
And you think you're the only one and you only want to connect.
I mean, that is exactly how it feels. And you feel like everybody else gets to be normal and you're not. But I also think people think spirituality and religion and sort of whatever in that wheelhouse is meant to be kept private, like your sex life. And so people
if you tell your therapist, they'll think you're crazy, so they're going to dismiss it.
Right. And I think people do dismiss it, right? And so it's like there's a shame element to it, almost like you're too stupid to know that that's not really a thing.
Or you're believing that because you want to bypass, or you just want to believe, you don't want to feel the grief, so you're just believing that your loved one's still there so you don't have to.
Correct. And what I think is, I mean, one of my chapter headings is like, can anyone tell me why I think that butterfly is my mom? And then I think the answer is, who's to say it isn't? Like how the hell do we know? And what difference does it make? If you energetically respond to that, like it is a message, then it is a message.
Right.
Like if you laugh at something, that is an energetic message that something is funny and joyful to you. If someone else doesn't laugh at it, that doesn't mean it's not funny. It just means that humor was not for them. So I really love the conversation about spirituality, because I know a lot of people's get banged around. They felt really deeply spiritual and very connected to God. And then they lost their child to leukemia and they don't know how to make anything make any sense anymore. I really love Kate Bowler, who is sort of, I think, our formative teacher on the idea of like, the prosperity Bible, the idea that like good things happen to good people, when any one of us grievers know that like shit things happen to good people all the time.
I mean, that was the first book when my aunt died. And that was really my like primary loss that shook everything in me. The first book I read was Rabbi Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Yeah. So good. It's in 1986. That was the same book that I think in 1986, we had a death in sort of the community that I was in, and that book was just on everyone's table. But, and I think that book sort of lands on the idea that like, okay, there's a God, but he's probably not able to like, he's not an all powerful God. He can't keep bad things from happening.
Right.
And I mean, I get in the weeds with that stuff, because what I actually think is more important is what sustains you, what supports you. Grief is so hard. Learning to live without the thing that you had yesterday, adapting your whole expectation of the future. Mary Frances O'Connor, my friend, writes all about this in The Grieving Brain. Like, it's just so impossibly hard. And if sitting on your porch and seeing a butterfly or picking up a dime or
A
hearing
song
a
that
piece
comes
of
through
music.
on the radio
Just
at the exact moment you needed to hear it.
yeah, I just sort of feel like why wouldn't they be trying to signal to us in our times of, rest or pleasure or like
Hardship or
right,
whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that be something that we could be able to rely on, whether we're making it up in our minds or whether it's really happening? But I really love the documentary Fantastic Fungi because it has all this sped up, watching things biodegrade. It's almost impossible to believe that it happens. And I really love the videos of it where it's like, no, there used to be a tree there.
Right.
Last year there was a tree there and now it's gone. But like, it's not gone. Its energy is now
You just see it in a different way. It's
not
right.
gone. The mycelium broke its cells down and those cells were then shifted and changed in terms of their energy. Kind of like when you lose weight. I remember saying when I was in high school to a friend of mine who was very sciencey, I was like, I lost 10 pounds. Where did they go? Like, did it turn into sweat? Like, where did I poop it out? Where did it go? And she was like, no, you created energy. And now that energy is like out into the world. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Like I hadn't.
And I always say too, like I compare it to my dog. Like when my dog hears something that I don't doubt that my dog is not hearing it. He's just able to tune into a different frequency than I am. So why is that not also possible?
Yeah.
When we are in a human body versus not a human body.
What I think is really tricky is that I have worked with people who would do anything to get signs and don't get them. And again, it's I don't know why. Like I'm somebody that the national anthem has made me cry my whole life. Like, a standing ovation gives me the chills. I have like a physically, energetically sensitive system. And by the way, I don't talk to my mom out loud and I don't see signs or get signs regularly other than these numbers. Like I will every once in a while look up and I do think my parents choose to be cardinals, but I don't see cardinals a lot. I just see them every once in a while. I am not somebody who has a consistent relationship. What I do have is a consistent sense that I am plugged in to something bigger. And there were some chapters in End of the Hour that we ultimately pulled out about how my family drove across country during COVID. I could not sit still. And it was again, as a therapist, it was such an interesting moment because when people are going through profound change and loss, we often tell them they have to sit still. Like, don't change too much. Don't cut bangs. Don't move to Arizona. Don't get divorced. But I couldn't sit still. That's how much energy there was in my system. And we ended up driving our kids across the country. And what I didn't realize I was seeking was the vastness of like the national parks or the vastness of a dark sky. I felt, because normally I like to be in small spaces. They make me feel more under control.
Contained.
But the way that I felt walking, I didn't know what the Badlands were. It was like, we're driving to the Badlands. I didn't know what they were going to look like. I actually thought they were going to be like plains with tumbleweeds that, looked sparse. That is not what the Badlands look like. The Badlands are insane. And I ended up really feeling like soothed by the chaos of that landscape, feeling like dinosaurs walked here. And
that's just that connection, right?
Yeah.
That
one small part of this much larger thing. And it's kind of all going to be okay because it's all, the earth has seen such devastation and horror and here it still is. Like it made me feel small in a way that when I think about it sounds bad, but the way that it I felt held by like the universe. And I didn't realize I was craving that. And then I chased it. I was like, what other dark sky can we see? And what other national park can we go to?
You're like laying in the middle of like a highway off of Route 66 somewhere.
Yeah, correct. And I mean, I do still sometimes I'm like, you guys, there's a meteor shower. I'll wake you up at 3:00.
I'm similar to that recently. It's been recent, but I think that goes to your point of the importance of not just thinking, oh, well, on Instagram, someone said I need a bath when I'm
Right.
grieving. And so I'm
Right.
taking baths, but I don't feel better. What's wrong with me?
right.
It's like, you're not, no. This is about tuning in to
That's
what
right.
you need.
You nailed it. So the grief mentor method is 6 core components to creating a personalized grief practice. So what it is it's experiments. I say, have you had any weird thoughts like about stuff you might want to do that seems like not like you? And people will say things like, yeah, it's so weird. I feel like I want to like pull out my violin from grade school. And then I don't say like, well, there's a lot of neuroscience about music and how it moves energy through I say like, ooh, let's try that. Let's experiment with that. Pull out the violin and see what that does. And maybe they come back the next week or check in with me and say like, oh, it's really frustrating. It wasn't tuned. I had to take it to a thing. Or maybe they say I picked it up and like, all I wanted to do was like play it forever. Because one person that their craving is going to be, you know, again, and we talk about that as sort of nourishment, like art nourishes us. It adds an energy to our system. It plugs us in. That might be for that person. Another person, it might be hiking. Another person, it might be cooking. Another person, it might be taking walks with a friend. I can't tell you what it's going to be. I just know that humans are built to have that core sense of soothing
That
when
helps
they
them
find
move through
their practice. Yeah. I hate this. I have to go.
I know. I'm getting ready to, I mean, clearly we could talk. We've already been on an hour. It feels like we barely scratched the surface. So your book is Can Anyone Tell Me? It is fantastic. It is a great guidebook for anybody who's grieving. Your memoir, End of the Hour, which is an awesome title. I remember hearing it a while back and thinking, what a fantastic title for a book. So Meghan, if people want to know more about you, know your work, tell us where they can find you.
The easiest way is to come to my website, which is my name, Meghan Riordan Jarvis, but it's spelled all kinds of ways.
It'll be in the show notes. So
yeah, in the show notes, or just Google Grief is My Side Hustle. That's the name of my podcast, which is really memorable. And you can find me there. I'm on Instagram the most of social media. So come follow me there. And I'm doing a lot of like starting some classes. I'm teaching in a bunch of places. I'm going to be at Omega in May. And then in July, I'm going to be up at the Cape Cod Institute teaching the Grief Mentor Method. Come and find me. I'm hoping to be of service and to be of use to people who are struggling in their loss.
Thank you. This was so great. I love our connection. I'm going to DM you on Instagram so we can find another time.
Awesome. That's so great. Amy, thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Let's talk again soon.
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Thanks.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.